LinkedIn is great at connecting you with the world's largest professional network. But it can't connect you with motivation on a Monday morning. LinkedIn can help you get insights from your professional community. But it can't give you any insight into why Dave's still talking on mute. And while it can't stop your boss from bringing tuna for lunch, LinkedIn can help bring your career to the next level. LinkedIn is the network that works for you. Visit LinkedIn.com to learn more.
Hey friends, I'm Rachel Grohl, and I'm your host for the Hearing Jesus podcast, where I help you to know God and to make Him known. Sometimes people are so overwhelmed when it comes to the thought of sharing their faith with others. But yet one of the simplest ways to do that is to simply tell people what God has done in your life. And if we've been a believer for any amount of time, we usually have stories that we can share of what God has done, the way He's provided, the way He's been with us. And it's from that place of overflow of our hearts, that we can really share what God has done. Because what that does in us is it produces this sense of thankfulness and gratefulness for who God is. And that's essentially what we see in Psalm 105. It's looking back through Israel's history, and it's giving them an opportunity to be thankful when they can look at all the ways that God was with them and stayed with them throughout their entire history as a nation. As we walk through the Psalms together, what we're doing is a devotional reading through the Psalms where I just share some of the history and the culture and the background information that maybe helps you understand a little bit better. For me, that was one of the things that has always been helpful for me to understand how it's relevant to my own life, as God's heart, His character, and His nature are revealed through the pages of the scriptures. So I pray that it's also a blessing for you. So I'm reading from the NIV starting at verse 1. Give thanks to the Lord, call on His name, make known among the nations what He has done. Sing to Him, sing praise to Him, tell of all His wonderful acts. Glory in His holy name, let the hearts of those who seek the Lord rejoice. Look to the Lord and His strength, seek His face always. Remember the wonders He has done, His miracles and the judgments He pronounced. O descendants of Abraham, His servant, O sons of Jacob, His chosen ones. He is the Lord our God. His judgments are in all the earth. He remembers His covenant forever, the word He commanded for 1,000 generations, the covenant He made with Abraham, the oath He swore to Isaac. He confirmed it to Jacob as a decree, to Israel as an everlasting covenant. To you I will give the land of Canaan as the portion you will inherit. When they were but few in number, few indeed, and strangers in it, they wandered from nation to nation, from one kingdom to another. He allowed no one to oppress them. For their sake He rebuked kings. Do not touch my anointed ones. Do my prophets no harm. He called down famine on the land and destroyed all their food supplies. As He sent a man before them, Joseph, sold as a slave, they bruised his feet with shackles, his neck was put in irons, till what he foretold came to pass, till the word of the Lord proved him true. The king sent and released him, the ruler of peoples sent him free. He made him master of his household, ruler over all he possessed, to instruct his princes as he pleased, and teach his elders wisdom. Then Israel entered Egypt. Jacob lived as an alien in the land of Ham. The Lord made His people very fruitful. He made them too numerous for their foes, whose hearts He turned to hate His people, to conspire against His servants. He sent Moses, His servant, and Aaron, whom He had chosen. They performed His miraculous signs among them, His wonders in the land of Ham. He sent darkness and made the land dark, for had they not rebelled against His words? He turned their waters into blood, causing their fish to die. Their land teemed with frogs, which went up into the bedrooms of their rulers. He spoke, and there came swarms of flies and gnats throughout their country. He turned their rain into hail, with lightning throughout their land. He struck down their vines and fig trees, and shattered the trees of their country. He spoke, and the locusts came, grasshoppers without number. They ate up every green thing in their land, ate up the produce of their soil. Then He struck down all their firstborn in their land, their firstfruits of all their manhood. He brought out Israel, laden with silver and gold, and from among their tribes no one faltered. Egypt was glad when they left, because dread of Israel had fallen on them. He spread out a cloud as a covering and a fire to give light at night. They asked, and he brought them quail and satisfied them with the bread of heaven. He opened the rock, and water gushed out. Like a river it flowed in the desert. For he remembered his holy promise given to his servant Abraham. He brought out his people with rejoicing, his chosen ones with shouts of joy. He gave them the lands of the nations, and they fell to heir to what others had toiled for, that they might keep his precepts and observe his laws. Praise the Lord. So this psalm is a psalm that calls the Israelites to worship. It's a call to praise and to obey God, and then also to pursue this deeper relationship with Him. That's what we see in verses 1 through 4. And that's because He miraculously directed their individual lives and their history as a nation, as the nation of Israel, in order to establish and preserve them as a people that He has set apart, His special people that He has set apart for His purposes. The psalm aims at inspiring gratitude, because when we have been under the Lord's care, there becomes a certain kind of joy that is something that cannot be taken away from us. There's a joy in knowing who God is and who He has been historically in my life. And that's what we're seeing here. When they come into the possession of the promised land and they understand what it means to be faithful to Him and to His word, there's a joy there that can never be taken from them. And so we too can look back and remember God's history with us and the things that inspire thankfulness to God. And that also gives us this greater loyalty to Him, because not just because of what He's done for us, but because He gave Himself up for us. That in and of itself should inspire us to talk to others about the good things that He does in our lives and the good things that He has done in our lives. Because in that way, gratitude to God and this willingness to spread His message go hand in hand. You know, we live in a season in the last couple of years, the news cycle, if you even still listen to it anymore, is full of chaos and things that seem sometimes unbelievable. And there's hardly a week that goes by that I don't hear from somebody that, we're living in the end times. And yet, if we are truly believing that we're living in end times, my question would be, what's your response to that? Because if we're living in end times, then there should be a burden placed on our heart for us to share the gospel message with those that don't yet know it. And I don't see those same people having that burden. And so I have to wonder, why is that? There's perhaps a number of reasons, but the opposite is sometimes true, that people do want to share, they just don't know what to say. And I think this is a perfect example when we look through some of these events throughout the history of Israel, and we can see and rehearse the things that God has done in their history. It's an example to us that we can do the same thing. I have talked about this before in the podcast, where we sometimes call them stepping stones. If you've walked through your garden on these different stepping stones, you could see you got from point A to point B using those stepping stones. Well, when you look back, you can see them as marks of where you've been. We can do that in our spiritual lives. We can look back and we can see these stepping stones of where we were at and where God showed up and where God did miraculous things and where God was abiding with us throughout different seasons of our lives. And we can use that to not only have faith to know that He's going to be there in the future, but to also share that with other people. Sometimes that is the best gateway to having conversations about who Jesus is just simply telling people what He's done for us in our own lives. This psalm is categorized in a couple different ways. In the broadest category, it's of course a hymn, a psalm of praise, but the historical content is what I want to point out. It's kind of like a historical psalm that looks backwards really from a very long period of history. It's looking to the post-exilic community in celebration of the way that Yahweh provided guidance from the time of the patriarchs all the way through the Egyptian bondage and the Exodus into the land of Canaan. And so what we see is this history of God's relationship with His special chosen people. And it's a span of history that really stretches a really long period of time. And I think that's such a powerful example for us as we look to do the same thing in our own lives. In verse 5 specifically, it talks about this idea of remembering. Remember the wonders he has done. And in this context, that word remember is not just mental, but it's also a historical experience. And so there are some people, some scholars that would even go so far as pointing out that remembering is a matter of action, not just memory. And so if you think about the descendants of Abraham, and when it talks about remember the wonders, and it's talking about what God has done, it's also talking about the Lord remembering the covenant he made with Abraham. That call to remember is to talk about that in terms of allowing that to affect your actions. And for me, when I go through seasons of maybe what some would call a dry spell, where I'm not hearing God's voice as clearly as normal or as I once did, I will remember what God has done for me in my past. And it's not just a mental exercise, but it's an action. That remembrance helps inform me and helps me to have faith about what's to come. And so I would encourage you, if you are in a spell where it feels like God is silent, it feels like you just are up against a wall, hitting a wall, think back to the times that God has been active in your life and the things he has done for you, and allow that remembrance, that act of remembering, to engage you into a place of faith for what he's going to do in the future. A lot of what we read in this psalm is self-explanatory, so I'm not going to go through all of it, but I do want to point something out. So yesterday we talked about how there was a biblical meditation on the creation story. Today's psalm looks back to the biblical references in Exodus. And so I just want to point out some of the things that we see, the parallels that we see. So verse 28, that says, he sent darkness and made the land dark, for had they not rebelled against his words. That is referring to the 9th plague of darkness that we see in Exodus chapter 10. Then in verse 29, it says, he turned their waters into blood, causing their fish to die. That is referring to the first plague, when the Nile was turned to blood, and we see that in Exodus chapter 7. Then in verse 30, it says, their land teemed with frogs, which went up into the bedrooms of their rulers. That, of course, is a reference to the second plague, the plague of frogs, which is mentioned in Exodus chapter 8. Then in verse 31, it says, he spoke, and there came swarms of flies and gnats throughout their country. That's referring to the 3rd and 4th plagues, which were flies and gnats. And you can read about that again in Exodus chapter 8. In verses 32 and 33, it says, he turned the rain into hail, with lightning throughout their land. He struck down their vines and fig trees and shattered the trees of their country. That refers to the 7th plague, which was hail. We read about that in Exodus chapter 9. Then in verses 34 and 35, it says, he spoke, and the locusts came, grasshoppers without number. They ate up every green thing in their land, ate up the produce of their soil. That, of course, is talking about the 8th plague, the locusts, which you can read about in Exodus chapter 10. And then in verse 36, it says, then he struck down all the firstborn in their land, the first fruits of their manhood. And that's talking of the 10th plague, the death of the firstborn, that we read about in Exodus chapter 11. For whatever reason, the 5th and the 6th plagues, which was the death of the livestock and the boils, those are not included. And again, if you're not familiar, I would encourage you to go back and read those passages in Exodus where it's talking about how God delivered his people out of the hands of Egypt. But it's really important, I think, for today's purposes, as we look to Psalm 105, to understand that this is a historical review, and it opens up this first part of the covenant formula where God says, I will be your God. And that's a poetic account of how the Lord has carried out that promise, first by making a covenant with Abraham, and then by working through his human servants of Moses and Aaron. And it's this evidence of God's work as the one that's holy, the one that's wise, the one that's powerful, and the one that preserves and governs his creation. And what we see in this pattern is this God that continues to rescue them. Now, were their behavior Was their behavior perfect in the promised land? Absolutely not. But one of the things that we see about God is that he is merciful. I don't know about you, so maybe I shouldn't say we. For me, there have been times in my life where I look back and I know that God intervened on my behalf. And can I say I was 100% faithful and every single moment of my life at that point? Absolutely not. I can't. This process of becoming more like Christ, this process of sanctification is exactly that. It's a process. And there are seasons of my life where I can look back and think, man, Lord, this is what was going on in my life at the time, and I was not even faithful to you. And in those moments where I wasn't even faithful to you, you were faithful to me. I think that's one of the key takeaways of what we see in this psalm, because we know what the behavior of Israel was. I mean, we spent the better part of over 100 psalms unpacking the behavior of Israel, and yet we see a God that continues to have mercy and pursue this people. So given that insight, I'm going to start over and I'm going to read again, starting from verse 1. Give praise to the Lord, proclaim his name, make known among the nations what he has done. Sing to him, sing praise to him, tell of all his wonderful acts, glory in his holy name. Let the hearts of those who seek the Lord rejoice. Look to the Lord and his strength, seek his face always. Remember the wonders he has done, his miracles and the judgments he pronounced. You, his servants, the descendants of Abraham, his chosen ones, the children of Jacob. He is the Lord our God. His judgments are all in the earth. He remembers his covenant forever, the promise he made for 1,000 generations, the covenant he made with Abraham, the oath he swore to Isaac. He confirmed it to Jacob as a decree, to Israel as an everlasting covenant. To you I will give the land of Canaan as the portion you will inherit. When they were but few in number, few indeed, and strangers in it, they wandered from nation to nation, from one kingdom to another. He allowed no one to oppress them. For their sake he rebuked kings. Do not touch my anointed ones. Do my prophets no harm. He called down famine on the land and destroyed all their supplies of food. And he sent a man before them, Joseph, sold as a slave. They bruised his feet with shackles. His neck was put in irons, till what he foretold came to pass, till the word of the Lord proved him true. The king sent and released him. The ruler of his people set him free. He made him master of his household, ruler over all he possessed, to instruct his princes as he pleased, and teach his elders wisdom. Then Israel entered Egypt. Jacob resided as a foreigner in the land of Ham. The Lord made his people very fruitful. He made them too numerous for their foes, whose hearts he had turned to hate his people, to conspire against his servants. He sent Moses his servant, and Aaron whom he had chosen. They performed his signs among them, his wonders in the land of Ham. He sent darkness and made the land dark, for had they not rebelled against his words? He turned their waters into blood, causing their fish to die. Their land teemed with frogs, which went up into the bedrooms of their rulers. He spoke, and there came swarms of flies and gnats throughout their country. He turned their rain into hail, with lightning throughout their land. He struck down their vines and fig trees, and shattered the trees of their country. He spoke, and the locusts came, grasshoppers without number. They ate up every green thing in their land, ate up the produce of their soil. Then he struck down all the firstborn in their land, the firstfruits of all their manhood. He brought out Israel, laden with silver and gold, and from among their tribes no one faltered. Egypt was glad when they left, because dread of Israel had fallen on them. He spread out a cloud as a covering, and a fire to give light at night. They asked, and he brought them quail. He fed them well with the bread of heaven. He opened the rock, the water gushed out. It flowed like a river in the desert. For he remembered his holy promise given to his servant Abraham. He brought out his people with rejoicing, his chosen ones with shouts of joy. He gave them the lands of the nations, and they fell heir to what others had toiled for, that they might keep his precepts and observe his laws. Praise the Lord. Oh God, we praise you. We praise you for your faithfulness to us throughout the generations, even when we have been faithless. Lord God, I pray for my friends today that as they look back over their lives, help them to remember, not just in thought and not just in faith, but in action. Help them to remember who you've been in their lives, and help that to give them faith for the next step of the journey. Lord, it's so evident when we look backwards to see the different ways that you've intervened on our behalf. But sometimes it's so hard to see that right now, or to even have the faith that you're going to be there in this next season. Lord, would you remind us, just as you reminded your people of Israel, how you had been along with them as a nation from day one. Lord, would you remind us of those times that you have been faithful in our lives. We thank you and praise you in all things. Amen. Hey friend, a quick break from the episode to tell you about something I don't want you to miss. This November, I'm hosting Bible Study Live in Rome, and I want to personally invite you to join me. You won't just learn about the Bible, you'll experience it live. We'll visit Luke's house, where Paul was held under house arrest and where Luke likely wrote part of his gospel. We'll stand in the Mamertine prison where Paul and Peter were imprisoned before they died, and where Paul wrote his final words in 2 Timothy. We'll walk through the catacombs, the birthplace of the underground church, and we'll step into the Colosseum, where early Christians were persecuted and gave their lives for their faith. It's not just about these sites, it's also about what happens in between. Each morning, we'll gather together for Bible study, letting God speak to us in these sacred spaces. In the evenings, we'll pause for worship and prayer, reflecting on all He's doing in our hearts. We'll enjoy fellowship, guided sightseeing, and rest each night in a beautifully restored villa nestled in the countryside overlooking Rome. This isn't just about history, it's about transformation. It's a sacred space to reconnect with God, to deepen your faith, and to walk where the early church once stood. So if your heart is longing for more, don't wait. Head to BibleStudyLive.org to grab your spot. Come be a part of something that could change everything.